Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Mind Refinery Podcast. As usual, I am your host, Kyle Bodanis. This week on the pod, we're beginning a reoccurring series of shows that focuses on the creative world of some of music's most popular and influential voices. This week is part one of our epic deep dive into the creative world of Kanye West. We're going to look at his career from his early days of producing until his genre-transcending album, Graduation. Before we get started, we are happy to announce that our culinary series, Plated, has been nominated for Best Documentary and Lifestyle Series, as well as Best Toronto Series at the 2020 Toronto Web Fest. The festival is on July 10th to 11th, and we'll have more information on screening schedules on our social media. By the way, if you haven't seen Plated, hop on our YouTube channel to check it out, and absolutely, positively, do not forget to smash that subscribe button. And now, without further ado, here's the show. Alright guys, here for the first leg of our deep dive into the creative world of Kanye West is Mind Refinery creative Andrew Lanza.
Hey.
And very special guest, a hip-hop guru, former writer for Pound magazine. He currently manages the ever-talented Terrell Morris, who, if you haven't listened to him, get on it, Coburn Blair. Coburn, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So to start this, I really want to talk about Kanye West before College Dropout. I think that a lot of people underestimate how much he was already changing the industry from a producing standpoint, and how much his push for a record deal and to push for getting out there into the record industry, as an artist, how much it really reflected what was happening in the industry and what was about to change the industry. How do you guys think that his work before College Dropout kind of changed and molded some of the sound of hip-hop?
I think you can't talk about Kanye West obviously without talking about what Rockefeller was in those days, and obviously his relationship with Jay-Z and his ties to a sound that kind of dominated hip-hop at the time. Like, you listen to H to the Izzo, it's obviously still sounds great to this day, and the kind of rich and lush sounds of that song. And then you have Takeover, which obviously has its place in the pantheon as being part of the Jay-Z versus Nas beef. And it was a rock sample.
It was the Doors. It was
the Doors
6
sample,
to 9, I believe, was the sample.
Yeah, and to be able to flip that sample into this song that's like a declaration of war against Nas, who obviously has his kind of rich history in the game, and Kanye West being a part of this feud that consumes hip hop and hip hop media at the time, and him being kind of in the background, but also having a seat at the table in that. So then to go on to do Stand Up for Ludacris or handle some production on Nas's The Lost Tapes and Cameron's Come Home With Me and
Dead Prez.
Dead Prez.
Just hip hop. That song is fucking grimy.
Just to interject, the Doors sample is 5 to 1. I just remembered, not 6 to 9. That was a song by Carr. Yes,
but that beat from hip hop by Dead Prez, that almost doesn't even sound like a Kanye beat. I just found that out recently that he produced that, and I was like, wow, I was kind of shocked.
I immediately have to wild out when that song comes on.
Yeah, I know. It makes me want to fight people.
Classic.
It's
I get fired the fuck up.
It's funny because if you look at all the different, because he had these really great apprenticeships, like we mentioned Jay-Z, Dame Dash, Talib Kweli, Dead Prez. It's interesting when you consider that group of musicians that he was around, because if you take what Rockefeller was doing and then you look at Dead Prez, it's almost like you're combining this, this very commercial hip hop with very intellectual, more socially conscious rap. And that almost feels like a blueprint for what he's about to do, but he's just going to take it in his own direction.
He fused those two elements, and that's kind of what gave you the Kanye West that we got in that era, right? He had the Dead Prez, the Talib Kweli, and those elements of backpack underground hip hop, and then he brought that to Jay-Z and to all these other kind of guys who were dominating the charts.
Exactly, he brought it to the mainstream.
Because what was he had the record with Dilated Peoples? Was that?
Oh yeah, I'm trying to remember what the fuck that was called. Yeah, see, like when you look at it now, it makes complete sense. I think Blueprint was a really good example of that before, he put together his pre CD Freshman Adjustment. Um, like I think if you want to see the effect of Kanye West sonically on the industry, the beginning of it, look at Blueprint. I think his work on that album is fucking fantastic and is the best example of what's going to come next.
Absolutely. For him to also do like TI records and like what he did, You Don't Know My Name and '03 Bonnie and Clyde. So he was like getting plaques already before he like led into kind of like setting on his own. But it also makes you wonder, like, why did it take so long for him to get signed? Like, was he just like not hitting marks for people, or?
Well, do you think it's his attitude, or do you think it's because in interviews he talks about how he went in there and was brash, and he's like, "I'm going to be this, I'm going to be that," and I that's kind of what I love about this era of Kanye West, is that he's like that and has an unbridled belief in himself, but at the same time, labels want to work with people, especially then want to work with people who play ball, especially in the fact that you're coming really off of the damage that file sharing did from a sales standpoint to the industry. Um, so I guess the question is, do you think that's a matter of not being able to see the future, or that maybe they just were turned off by him himself?
Well, I think it's a lot to do with like pigeonholing him as also a producer, and him just being, everybody's thought of him as a producer. They knew he had talent as that, and even though he was rapping at them in the studio for hours on end, I think um, in that more so in the past, where people kind of pigeonholed you as one thing, and it was probably really hard for him to break out of that, no matter how hard he tried. Um, yeah, so I think that had something to do with it. Also, his image, obviously, his brashness. I think maybe at the time his image wasn't marketable, for lack of a better word. He wasn't like a gangster rapper. He wasn't. He didn't have the image, so they couldn't, like in their opinion, they couldn't market him.
I have a question. Do you think we get the Kanye West we have today if he signs to another label and not Rockefeller? Like, say he signed to Sony or like Virgin or something like that, or EMI.
I think so. Yes, man. I think yes. I think if he went somewhere and they tried to control him, he would have just been like, "Fuck it." And then you know what? I bet that would have ushered in SoundCloud and shit faster. He would have just been like, "Fuck it, I'm just gonna put my shit out there. Fuck a label," because he would have gotten like treated like trash at Capitol or whatever, and then he would have just like cut out the middleman and just put out his shit for free. And I bet you that in that turn it would have sparked SoundCloud and Bandcamp, et cetera, putting your shit out for free. I think that would have maybe been a catalyst for that, or more early on, obviously.
The major labels, even at this, like, they're oppressive at that point. From I don't know, because I think a lot of the major label pressure comes from making sure there's singles and things like that, and I don't think he would have had a problem with that. It's just, where does I think Rockefeller was a situation where he was with people who already respected him
Hmm.
and cared about him too. So there was a different there was different restraints put on. They're more interested in seeing what he could do. Like, they're not going to sign anybody they don't feel is commercial, and especially Rockefeller. Like, they're businessmen. They know, like, they know what it takes at this point. And I think that major labels are very averse to risk at that point. So I don't even know if he's getting signed necessarily at that point. And I don't know how all these things, because we're going to get into the question about what would happen if he didn't survive his car accident, but like, this is another one of those things, is like, what one of those big music what ifs is, what if they signed to this label, like, what if Sonic Youth signs to a different record label? They don't really shop around, and they aren't discerning, and they go with fucking Geffen, but they go with someone else, and they don't give them the same freedom. I think that people kind of overlook how restrictive those record labels are, but at the same time, I think what Lance is saying does have some credence in that. Maybe he would find another way to make it happen, because he doesn't seem like the kind of person who'd be discouraged, but I don't know what that looks like if he's
No,
not
he
working.
would not be.
Yeah, exactly. But I don't know what that looks like after, I guess is the big point.
I think maybe you would have got like one out, like if they wanted him to play ball or whatever, he would have got they would have got one album that they wanted, and then he would have been like, fuck this, and then he would have got signed somewhere else and then did his thing, or he would have just taken it straight to the people or something. I don't know.
What do you think about that, Coburn?
I don't know. I don't know that you'll see. Like, I don't. Like, I think there's a lot of people who got buried, like being on the wrong label, and a lot of people who weren't able to like articulate their artistic dream with being on the wrong label. So I don't know that we'd see Kanye in the same way if he didn't land on Rockefeller, because I don't think he would have had the same artistic freedoms. I don't think you get like all those features that he got that helped make.
You wouldn't have had the same collaborative environment, right? Because like there's always an us against them thing with the labels too. Because like at the end of the day, when you're going into the studio, they're the charge, the meter's running, and it's and you're paying back your advance, and they're in your pocket for the first record, and I don't know if the environment, because we know he thrives on collaboration. We know that is one of the big that is one of the things that fuels his career and has helped him. Does he get paired with the right people? Does he get on tour with U2 and and the Rolling Stones? Do all these things happen? Because you're getting more into these Back to the Future fucking questions where like anything in another environment may not have worked. It's like putting writers in other environments, or what if Ernest Hemingway didn't live through the First World War, or what if what was it, like an NBA player is drafted by the wrong team? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is Michael Jordan going to be as good if Portland takes him and not Sam Bowie? You know what I mean? Like, maybe? I mean, I'm sure you would have had the talent, but like at the end of the day, there's all these different things involved in kind of, being in the right environment, being surrounded by the right people, getting the right freedom to express yourself, but also having the people also to, rein you in at the right times as well. And that all comes from like, good collaboration. And I just don't think if he signs to Capitol Records, he's necessarily going to get it. Because I mean, even if you look at like the Beastie Boys when they got signed, in their early days, with Capitol, it's a lot of it is just, the label doing stuff, and then you're just kind of hearing about it after the fact. And I think he wants too much control over what he's doing. I think if he signed to a major label like that, it would have been a situation where, he starts something like Interscope, like a sub label of it, because to kind of have his own, like he starts like a Def Jam or Rockefeller or something like that, to try to like keep him, to kind of give him his own space to do it.
Yeah, I also wonder too, because there's value in him being next to Jay-Z and being next to like in these rooms with these people. So I think if he signed maybe direct to a label and didn't have like the backing of like the biggest artists in the world at the time, like
Dame Dash had to vouch for him.
Yeah, there's no atmosphere, I think, in that. Like, I think there's still like his will and his drive, but I don't know that we get College Dropout the way we did. I don't know that like I'd say he's gonna put something out and he'll keep going, but I don't know that we'll see the iterations of the music that we saw.
So putting yourself in the exec shoes, you meet Kanye. Does he seem like someone you would dive into working with at this time?
I think so. I think like you look just on his production track record alone, right? Because there's like it's undeniable at that point. So I think he's someone you have to take a risk on, and I think a lot of people like did that, and I think a lot of people could see the talent, see the vision, and like I think the people who didn't either came around or Kanye wasn't interested in working with them in the way that like that they weren't interested in working with him.
I want to move on to College Dropout, because, and kind of one of the big what ifs in popular music. What would have happened to hip hop and popular music had Kanye West died in the car accident? What does it look like today?
I think like that's a really hard question to ask. It completely transforms the world that we know and what hip hop looks like today. And I think even like fashion, music, I think a lot would be offset by that.
Yeah, it's almost. Sorry, go Lanza.
Oh, I was just gonna say. I think at the time, like the rebrand. Well, not the rebranding, but like the bringing back of gangsta rap. I feel like it had already started to run its course. Like obviously, music trends don't last forever, and I think Kanye was probably the catalyst to that change. He was probably what really sparked it, made it change. But I feel like it would have changed, maybe not in that same direction, but I feel like there was some other music at the time that was kind of like going in that direction. But yeah, that is an interesting question though.
I'm wondering if it doesn't hit the mainstream as hard as it did, because if you look at everything that's happened, since, around the 2003, 2004 timeframe on, so there was that more intellectual style of hip hop. There kind of had already been, there's guys like Common, there's guys like Dead Prez,
Talib Kweli, yeah.
Talib Kweli, yeah, and I'm wondering if that just remains part of underground, or adjacent to what is going on in hip hop. Although I'm a firm believer that you can't continue with that resurgence of gangster rap, because at the end of the day it's almost like it gets too tiring,
Yeah.
And there's other parts of people's brains and souls that they need to get, that they need to kind of have highlighted. And also his bringing of electronic music into hip hop massively affected, kind of what we're listening to right now, especially within hip
For
hop. Like
sure.
there's entire genres. I mean, and as we get into future episodes, we're going to talk about, the influence of 808 and Heartbreak, My Dark Twisted Fantasies. But I think it was more this ability to kind of show people that you could think, not that gangster rappers weren't thinking, it's just that the branding was so on point with a level of negativity. And in earlier interviews he talks a lot about how he felt that as a black person, that stereotype was constraining in general, not just as an artist.
I think with Kanye, like bringing these kind of ideas that were already like around in the kind of subgenre of hip hop and bringing them to a commercial sphere. And also, I think Kanye had a lot more access in the ways that like these other guys who might have been respected by, like, say, a Jay-Z or whoever, had access to these people. But Kanye's access allowed, like, because he was with Jay-Z, who was the biggest at the time, allowed these ideas to hit the mainstream right away, because Jay-Z had kind of co-signed him, like, even inadvertently, by having him on his label.
Yeah, I think what really speaks to that is that just like almost the fusion of the two. Like you have that like not like you have that mainstream hip hop sound like we talked about. Like you have Jay-Z on the album, you have Ludacris on the album, but then at the same time you do have like Talib Kweli and Common on the album. So like I think that made it accessible to like you said, like he's with the people like Jay-Z, he's in the room with those people, so he already has access. But yeah, I think it's just that like kind of like fusion of like the two sides of hip hop, and that's what really was kind of the biggest one of the biggest reasons that it got bigger in the mainstream, I think.
Yeah, I think this question really kind of frames the overall importance Kanye West has, and to music in general, especially what we're listening to these days. In my opinion, if he's not around, music doesn't sound like what it does today. Like like obviously dominant.
For sure.
Obviously, there's forms that obviously hip hop, electronic music, indie rock are going to be around, but this idea of the melding and the transcending just normal influence, like just your standard influences, and combining everything and throwing it together, which I mean we're really going to talk about when we get into Graduation. It's like one of those Back to the Future situations where it's like it will create an anomaly in the space-time continuum, because my brain can't comprehend what it would actually be like.
I think there's something to be said too for Kanye just being himself, and by doing so he made it like cool, or he kind of made it a thing for people to just be themselves in a way that like you didn't have to like put on a front necessarily in hip hop anymore. I think
you didn't have like a gimmick.
Yeah, he had no gimmick, right? Like his gimmick was he worked at the Gap and he'd been trying to make it as a rapper. At the time, I think that was super freeing to see someone like that in the mainstream who could be in all those rooms, as he said, but also just was himself. Like he was the backpack guy, he was like whoever, and he opened up his musical like taste. And like I'm sure there's people in the underground who are doing the same thing that he was doing, or maybe had some of the same ideas, but having the kind of stratosphere that he was at and having the access, it kind of allowed other people to be comfortable with that.
Now, I want to get on to our initial thoughts of College Dropout. When you first listened to this record, how did it sink in with you? What was the feelings?
I think I started, I think even before College Dropout, floating around was this Kanye song with Old Dirty Bastard called Keep the Receipt.
Yeah.
And that song I must have played in like whatever Windows Media Player on my cousin's computer like a million times because I was like,
with some sick visuals going.
Yeah,
there's just a psychedelic kaleidoscope in the background.
Yeah.
I think it was just kind of like something I really hadn't heard before. At least it was new and it was fresh to me. And then I remember watching like obviously all Falls Down and like on 106 and Park, the Through the Wire video, like Kudi and Chike did that video, and I'm pretty sure they used to work at MTV, and they kind of cut that video during like not work hours, and they cut it like for super cheaply for Kanye. And I thought that video was amazing, and all the stories and just the way it kind of went in.
If you haven't checked out the Through the Wire video, definitely check it out.
Yeah, I mean, again, like I was saying before, all this older stuff like I listen to after the fact, so I don't have that kind of like rose colored like nostalgia for these albums. So I guess I don't know, maybe I'm able to look at it like a little more critically. For a fucking debut album, like this album's insane. It's just excellent. It's excellent front to back. It's got a ton of bangers on it. I mean, obviously the skits are whatever. I'm never a huge fan of skits. Yeah, like listening to it the first time, like after the fact, already being like a casual fan of like the newer stuff, and then going back and listening to the older stuff, like it's really good. Like obviously I was aware of like all like the like the big songs when it came out and stuff, but just overall going through the back catalog, really enjoyed this one.
Standout tracks, like what for us has really kind of got us.
Never Let Me Go, I think, is probably my favorite.
Yeah, I think.
Never Let Me Down. My apologies.
Yeah, Never Let Me Down. I think Slow Jams, I think, needs its own kind of like category, because I think that as a single was amazing. Like having Twista, who was kind of like just bubbling at this time period, and Jamie Foxx. I don't know if he was coming off of Ray or Ray was just slightly after this, but he was like obviously like all his personality and like fame and stuff like that coming to do a track with Kanye, and then Family Business too. Like I think Kanye really brought his personality and persona, and even with the skits, like I kind of remember like a historical black college influence there. Reminds me of like Spike Lee's School Days.
I really think that's what he was going for too. Like, because I like there's really direct parallels, I believe, to that.
Yeah, so I definitely think so. So yeah, I think just like influencing the whole like the school kind of vibe of it and everything that kind of went into it. It was really personal, extremely well crafted. Yeah, extremely well thought out too, which sometimes you don't see in a debut album. Because I think sometimes like a lot of debut albums, at least in the hip hop sphere, like they're kind of like a rush to get an idea out, and you kind of like perfect that idea maybe on your third album. But I think this was so well crafted that it came together, and it struck a chord with people who were listening at the time.
For me,
and it's really well paced as well. Sorry, I just wanted to say that. Like,
yes, it's very
like
well paced.
It doesn't like peter out at the end like some hip hop albums do.
For me, Jesus Walks there is a theatricality to his music that is going to come out as you know, as things progress in his career. And you know, for me, Jesus Walks it's like this widescreen epic of a song with really powerful imagery. It wasn't some of the funnier, more, you know, backpack rap type stuff that is like We Don't Care is featured on this record. Like, I love that song, but Jesus Walks in comparison to it is just such grandeur, and he will only continue moving through with that throughout his career. So I thought it was a really, really good starting point. The videos are good. I mean, you mentioned the videos, Coburn, and he's really, even from a beginning, very smart about putting together like his visual branding as a result, you know, for it. And you know, I thought the singles were picked really, really well, and they're good. There's a bunch of them. They got mad radio play, but also you touched on what the whole idea of it as an all-time great, an all-time great debut release. Where do you think it is in that pantheon of great releases, like through hip hop and like beyond in pop music?
I think it's tricky, because I think this album, like, it obviously did well, but I don't think this was the album that like caught people on to Kanye West. I don't think people would catch on to Kanye West till Graduation came out and that minted him. So I think for a lot of people it might not rank as high as a debut, but I'm not sure in the larger picture of albums. That was just my kind of like thoughts at the time and since.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like other like another debut album to kind of compare it to.
well, with hip hop, it's hard because like if you're looking at debut albums as a playoff bracket, for
Il-
sports, hip hop.
Illmatic.
This is exactly what I'm saying. So you have
Oh,
Illmatic.
I wouldn't. I don't know.
So you have
I think I.
Illmatic. You have Ready to Die. Sorry, you have Ready to Die.
Yeah.
You know what I mean. You have Doggy Style. You have License to Ill. You have Reasonable Doubt. So like hip hop. Like when I look at opening records, like for debut records and just the level of quality, hip hop always brings it. Like there is a massive hip hop presence in there, especially when I consider other debut records from a pop lexicon that are super famous, like fucking like Boston, their first record, and how those records are in the time are okay, but like some of the hip hop offerings from the debut record standpoint are absolutely fantastic. I don't think that this record is better than and up at that kind of level. I think it's good. I think it
Mhm.
had a massive impact on the industry, but it's not transcending genre like Are You Experienced by Jimi Hendrix, or Appetite for Destruction, or Horses by Patti Smith, or the Clash self-titled debut. It's not like, I don't think it's at that level, but what I think it really does is it or sets the stage for what's about to come afterwards. It's a really good like opening thesis for what he is going to for what he's going to do moving forward, I think.
Yeah, I think like as you mentioned before with Jesus Walks, like there's what like 3 different videos for that song.
Well, he did that. He did that whole thing of anthology music videos.
Yeah.
So there's the 3 Jesus Walks videos, and there's a few more other ones too. I think there's an alternate one for Through the Wire. But this goes back to that whole paying a lot of attention to the to the visuals and to the artistic side beyond music as well. And that's the thing that where this is unique in terms of debut albums, where it's really really looking at the full breadth of media in a way that Ready to Die didn't, and in the way that like Illmatic doesn't. But those are just great records.
I think Kanye almost has like a cheat code here, because at this point he was already in the music industry for however many years, like having placed albums on major records or major albums. So he could kind of get his toes wet at the same time as put together and craft this album, because like there's bits and pieces of this album other places, like he'd been kind of trying to get this album together. So I think this was a really well realized and really well executed album in a way that some other debuts kind of don't have the luxury of kind of having experience in the music industry before putting an album out.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say, yeah, this album does lay a great groundwork. I would call it like among his top 3 albums. I might put it at 2 some days. I might put it at 1 other days. But yeah, just
yeah, I was just gonna say, like you said, like he had a cheat code being in the industry. Like he's been around all these people. Like not only is that connections, but like he's been learning from like the best in the business for X amount of years, and then you can just really see that on the album. Like the album from a production standpoint is super polished. Like for a debut album, like it's slick as hell. Not to say that it doesn't kind of retain a bit of that kind of like rough around the edges, but it's a very very well made album, especially for a debut.
I feel like with this album, it's almost like it's terraforming the music industry to suit his needs, rather than it being like this thing where gangster rap is prevalent. It's now beginning to turn it. How do you think this record affected the music industry as a whole?
I think this record kind of put people who are paying attention and like people who are in the know on notice. I think that like gangster rap, what I would call maybe the 3rd iteration of gangster rap, had kind of taken over at this point, and there wasn't too much difference there. The charts had kind of been constructed by it, and they kind of own it. So I think this album, like doing what it did and having so many singles that kind of charted, and it just made space in a way that wasn't really seen before it.
This is the album that makes everyone's minds open to what's bringing everything else in, where there's still this idea of tribalism in hip hop in terms of what is hip hop, what isn't hip hop, and this really breaks those doors down and allows people's brains to be ready for all the other stuff that he's going to do, because his next 2 records, there's going to be really swift and really fast maturity. and it's good. It takes the music industry by storm. I'm like the march from College Dropout to Graduation is probably I think one of the most intense periods of change the music industry has gone through, on top of the fact that it's in the wake of file sharing and all this kind of stuff, so people are wondering whether or not music can even be commercial again. It really kind of moves the bar forward. But what I want to do is I want to kind of segue into Late Registration from there. This for me, this is my favorite Kanye West record. This one,
Really?
I love this record. I love it so much.
It's actually my least favorite, to be honest with you.
It's incredible. I absolutely love it.
Yeah, I think I'm with you, Kyle.
Because what? Because and honestly, well,
That's
first of
super
all,
interesting.
well, I guess that really answers Andrew Lance's initial thoughts on the record. But like for me,
I don't think it's a bad record. Don't get me wrong.
I don't think
Sorry,
he puts
I just
out
wanna put that
any.
out there.
I don't think he puts out any bad records other than that aren't named Jesus is King.
Okay, yeah, I'm again, yeah, I'm not including
Right.
that
Like
one at
it's
the
hard
moment.
to put out. It's hard to name a bad record by Kanye West
Mhm.
where like this is not good. This is not quality. He's always measured against himself, which is obviously super difficult.
Yeah, I mean, like just leading up to Late Registration, he did Common's B, which was like, in my opinion, like one of Common's best albums.
It's
And-
definitely his best album, 100%.
And like that, like he kind of had just come off of that to go into his to putting out his own album, and like again, like where he was at in production and sound and concepts. I think this is what I've always said about Late Registration is it's kind of like College Dropout on acid.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
took a lot
interesting.
of the elements of College Dropout and like some of the weaker parts he improved on, and like some of the grandiose he turned up, and it's concise. I mean, as concise as a 22
I was about to say.
but he just kind of found ways to improve on what he'd already done and continue with what he would become.
Standout tracks.
Crack music for me.
Crack music, fuck yeah.
Incredible.
Diamonds, both, and Gone.
Honestly, man, like I know it was like a huge single, but like Touch the Sky, man. Like I love Touch the Sky. It's got Lupe on it. The video's hot. Yeah, I don't know. That's like it's got the like that, like you can hear that like John Bryan on it. Like I don't know. I like that one a lot.
For me, the fucking lead single on it, fucking it wasn't the first single, but Gold Digger. Like I had really not heard a banger at this level in a while, and it was just fucking really good.
Song was everywhere.
It was
when
everywhere,
it came out.
and you see the beginnings of like these stadium ambitions with it, and where it's big, and you can see it in front of 20,000 people, and how that's going to play out. And Celebration, I fucking loved it too, because it was just, this record is so like lush and pretty and like joyous, even though it gets into some darker stuff in it, especially with Diamonds. But it's absolute, like, it's just the feeling that this record gives me is a feeling that no other record gives me. And when I want a hit of what this record gives, it's the only substitute. There's nothing else. There is no substitute.
So I think with like Gold Digger on Late Registration, like I mentioned before, Jamie Foxx, and I think I was wrong actually. So Ray had just come out just before this album, so he kind of took that sample of Jamie Foxx singing in the movie and then flipped it into like this record, which is like brings more of like the hilarity that we had on the New Workout Plan. It's him and Jamie Foxx again, who had just come off of the last record on College Dropout. It's funny, it's hilarious, it kind of also like pertinent and recent because of the movie Ray. And so I thought that record, like, obviously is a standout on it, but it's just like you said, it's very lush. It's a big kind of like the beginnings of like a stadium record for Kanye, and I just thought it was
that
like,
first line, just like that huge first line, you can hear them shout. You can hear that shouting in at the head of at a huge stadium for sure.
And then like Drive Slow with Paul Wall, who was also like doing really well at this time. And like I think that's another thing that's understated about Kanye is his ability to find like unique and interesting collaborations. Like he'll take people who are buzzing at the time and people who maybe not, like aren't in the mainstream, and he'll put them together on a song, and you'll be like, wow, like I didn't think this guy could sound like this, or I didn't think this would work.
And then he also has Adam Levine on it.
Yeah, and it's really I find that his whole approach to music and collaboration is completely different than his entire approach to the rest of his life. It's like when he speaks about music and when he's talking about collaborations, all I want to do is sit and listen. And then with his other stuff, I'm like, yeah, I can't deal with the some of the other shit. But like touching on the collaborations and his ability to do that, he has the biggest and healthiest ego almost simultaneously in a weird vacuum world.
Healthiest?
Yeah, because he's not afraid of collaboration. You know how many people are afraid of collaboration?
Oh, okay. Oh, like you meant like okay, like literal like ego as in okay. I see what you're saying.
Yeah, like what I'm saying is, you know, he is there is elements of megalomania sometimes, but he is when it comes to music, he's a straight genius, and he knows when other people, you know, when other people have stuff to offer and what he can learn from them.
Yeah, I mean it's like he's like the conductor. You know what I mean? He's like the producer. He's like the director of the album. Like he takes all these pieces. He with his whether it be with collaborating with like John Bryan or like on with like the artwork or the video or with getting all these DJs. Like he's getting like electronic DJs and shit later on. Like he really knows how to like assemble like a fucking A team. You know what I mean? He can really like Megatron, not Megatron. He can like
Voltron?
Megazord. Yeah, he can like Voltron, like a really really good A team. And then but then he's like, not to say that he's like, oh, like let all these other people do my work. Like no, like he's utilizing all their strengths to form his vision.
I don't think there's like maybe other than Jesus King, there's not an album where like he doesn't do that.
And, yeah, that's a good point.
He doesn't pull like he's always I don't know. He just has a way of pulling from and drawing inspiration from and putting these kind of sounds together that is just completely unique to him.
You mentioned John Bryan. This for me, this is one of the reasons why this is my favorite album because it's just his decision to get a guy who composed like Magnolia and Eternal Sunshine. Like it's smart.
Punch Drunk Love.
It's savvy. Like this is something he's not like he didn't just say I have to go out and get Rick Rubin or whoever all that kind of stuff. Like there's other producers who find their way onto this record, but just like the sheer emotional professional collaboration that takes place on this is kind of why for me the only other record that I kind of accept that people will say is better is My Dark Twisted Fantasy, because that for me is the uber of this. That is taken to another level with this where and we'll get into that, but this the full fleshed out discipline like of his process. But this with John Bryan, like when you hear them talk about what they did for each other from a musical standpoint, is really inspiring.
Yeah, I love how there was like an interview where he was talking about it, and he's like pretty much loved his shit on with Fiona Apple, and then loved his shit with like on the Eternal Sunshine soundtrack, and then he called him up, and John Bryan was just like, "Yeah, man, let's do it." And like he even said he's like there was no PR person involved, there were no managers, there was no labels. He's like, yep, like Kanye's like, I gotta start on this right away. And John Bryan's just like, yep, I understand, I'm on my way. And then they just started.
Yeah, it's interesting because John Bryan, I remember reading an interview, he says like Kanye sees music architecturally, like spatially, and he said that's what he recognized in him when like working with him. And I think that like absolutely speaks to the way Kanye approaches most things in his career, like the way he does fashion or the way he does music. It's like he kind of can pick he has the building blocks and the foundation and can like pick the rooms out in a way that like someone else might not see.
As a person who really who works in the industry in this city, Coburn, like how hard is it to find collaborators like that? When you see like how rare are those special collaborations?
I mean they're completely rare because you can put people in the same room who you might think might look good on paper or things that like would make sense typically, but like the chemistry is not always there and the vision's not always there, and sometimes you're kind of like you get the end product and you're like, oh, what is this? This sounds nothing like it should sound, or like the production doesn't match or like the energy doesn't match. So like to kind of have somebody to look at like Kanye and be like, oh wow, this person can do everything and more. He can take like who hires a film composer for their second album? It's like out of the box thinking completely, like and that's I think lends itself to Late Registration, making it sound as lush and rich as it does.
Do you think that is really the source of the improvement from this record, from last record to this record?
I think so. Like, I think it's also like a bit more personal, I think, and it's a bit broader. It's more textured, and I think that kind of gives it a little bit more timelessness in some ways than College Dropout.
Yeah, I don't like. For me, late registration holds up much better. I
I agree.
listen to College Dropout. It's fantastic, but because we now know what he's capable of and what the music industry has become, it almost seems antiquated. It's still great, but it's funny because he's going to make his own work obsolete by creating a sound, then chopping it down, then creating another sound, and then chopping it down. And I think that's the greatest source of maturity on this, is that he is unwilling to rest on his laurels and fight the last war. He's not into, this is how I got famous last time. He has a like a structure for it, but if for him, if he's not pushing the needle forward from an experimentation and from a professional development standpoint, he himself views that as a failure. Like, he'll, whatever comes out, if it doesn't live up to that. This is kind of why I'm wondering if the music he's making now is worthy of the stuff he put out before.
Yeah, I don't think it is, but yeah, I think you're right. I think he's never someone to rest on his laurels, and I think you have a lot of people will beg their like artists for the album, like, that they used to make. A lot of people are like, "Oh, can you make that again?" But I don't think I see that critique with Kanye too much, because he's so willing to kind of build on his old sounds and like take a sound completely different in new ways. People are kind of like a little bit more willing to let Kanye experiment. They're like, I think up until Yeezus, people were, or maybe 808s was the one where people were like, he's experimenting too much. But people are kind of willing to give him the benefit of the doubt in a way that I don't think a lot of other artists get.
It's interesting how people love criticism at the beginning, but then all of a sudden they'll declare something like a fucking certified classic.
Yeah, the like people always say, you have your whole life to make your debut album, and I think that kind of shows with College Dropout. It's kind of like he has like a lot of those songs. Like, a lot of those songs were made for the album, but there's like a lot of stuff from like kind of like the back catalog and stuff. While I feel like Late Registration is a lot more like unified, and I think that definitely had a lot to do with like John Bryan's kind of like giving it like a theme. Like, there are some older tracks on there. Like, I think Gold Digger is like a really old track,
but he provides unifying elements.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like him and John Bryan did their thing with it to make it contemporary to that time and make it more unified with the album. And I think that's why I definitely like Late Registration better. It definitely feels more of like a unified album. There's like more of a theme to it. There's kind of like I feel like there's like more like kind of like through lines that run through it. And yeah, I fully can kind of see that with that album.
So Lupe Fiasco is introduced to us during this process. I like that already his head is focused on, one, how can I also bring people along, but also how can I create my own sphere of influence like Jay-Z, rather than just being part of the Rockefeller circle. He's creating his own thing from the very beginning. You see a dedication to that.
Yeah, I think like introducing Lupe and like his standout verse on Touch the Sky. And Kanye had kind of, I don't know if John Legend is maybe somewhere on this album too, but like Kanye also brought on John Legend around as well, who's obviously a musical heavyweight in his own right. So Kanye kind of built his sonic world with the touches of like these people. Like Rhymefest is on, I think, at least not on both albums. He's writing on both albums at this time. GLC's around. So Kanye is kind of like slowly building what would become like good music at this point, kind of leaning on these people in for their elements to add to his own and add to what makes Kanye West.
It's interesting how his records, like how they unfold, because it's as if he's opening the door each time for his next record, and he's smart about that. And I think a lot of musicians don't think like that, because you get into the whole idea of you need to release your last record to get sales and to make sure cash is coming in and all those kind of things. But this, he never does that. It's like all he's doing is each record is prepping his listener for the next record. And especially as his records get better too. It's almost like he's leading up to the great record, to the one that's going to last for a long time, even though he's making great records as he goes along. How do you think this set him up for Graduation?
This is the album that, like, people who are paying attention to Kanye, it gave them like a faith and an ability to trust him and trust where he was going with sounds, and to trust that he could kind of take you somewhere, you know, like you're able to kind of trust that you're going to go on a musical journey. So that's why when he brought on like Daft Punk on Graduation, it doesn't sound out of place.
Yeah, you can kind of see the like you're saying, you can see the evolution in every album. It's like almost like every album is half the last album and half the next album. That's how I mean, obviously with some glaring
No, that's
examples.
an interesting point. There's some overlap, so you see the continuity, but it moves on.
Yeah, you can see like where he came from with every album, but then you can see where he's going with every album, I feel like. And I think maybe Graduation is probably the best example of that, but I mean, it exists on Late Registration as well.
Funny too, because in this time period, this album I believe released in August, and in September he was on TV with George Bush.
Yeah.
Or with Rob Williams.
No, it's the Mike Myers, the I don't care. George Bush doesn't care about black
Myers.
people.
Yeah.
I stood up and applauded.
Yeah.
I stood up and fucking applauded. Thankfully, someone said it.
Mike Myers' face when he says it, he's just like, I don't know what to do.
Yeah, he's like, get me out of here.
Yeah, he's like,
and then he just kind of tries to save it by like continuing on.
Well, because Kanye delivers that first line, and it's obviously not on script.
Oh, that's way off script.
And then Mike Myers just gives his scripted line, and it's like he doesn't blink for 45 straight seconds. Yeah, I think his ability to do that is pretty fantastic. It's almost like his whole career is like a series, like, you know, a TV series, and he has to like set up the rules for it. But as he moves on and you want to take it to new places, he has to set up those rules and parameters to work in. And he always seems to does it. I do think that there is a lot, like, you see his influence of people like Miles Davis in him with that. How am I acclimatizing my listeners to what I'm about to do, you know? And you saw that with Miles Davis when he went from modal jazz, when he went from, you know, bop to modal to fusion, going electric, that kind of thing. And I think that, you know, there's always these little through lines of things that great artists do that he also does. I don't know if it's on purpose or subconsciously, probably a little bit of both. But you know, as we move into Graduation, I think he set that time period up very well. And then, I mean, Graduation is the record that transcends all of this idea of what is hip hop, what is not hip hop. He's like, that is not the game he's playing anymore, because he doesn't have to worry about it. One thing I want to get into before we move on to Graduation, though, is Late Orchestration. Another thing that really kind of shows that Kanye West is different from other artists. It's absolutely fantastic, because I already love these.
Yeah, one of my favorite live albums.
It's so good.
Okay, so what is it? I have no idea what
Coburn,
this is.
Explain Late Registration. Sorry, Late Orchestration.
Late Orchestration is Kanye going to the UK, and he went to Abbey Road Studios, brought in a full orchestra, like a 17-piece, like all-female string orchestra, had like John Legend, Lupe Fiasco, and GLC and Consequence from Late Registration come in and filmed it, and just did a 12 tracks from it and did it live, and it's just amazing. You get to watch Kanye working with an orchestra, just bringing the whole album like together, but also like it gives it a new life. And the cover is like the College Dropout bear, or whatever you want to call that bear, and it's walking down like across like Abbey Road. And
what?
Also, I love the reorganization of the album too. Like, it's starting, like, they open with Diamonds, and it's so fucking sick. It's incredible.
Is there like a documentary did he like go and like they just went and recorded, or did they like go and like work out all the tracks together and blah 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 there?
Well, they did rehearsals and stuff, and there's like a DVD and like a video for it.
Oh man, I gotta check that out.
Yeah, the whole video you can watch behind the scenes of it, and it shows like kind of how it kind of came together. But yeah, I think it's just like completely stand out. Like, there's obviously in the rock space and in like kind of the blues and other genres, there's like a good history of doing like live albums. But I think in rap, other than like the MTV's Unplugged series that ran for a while, there's not too many standout like live albums. I think there's like Jay-Z's, there's Lauryn Hill, and I would have to put like Orchestration there too.
What do we think of Jay-Z's, just as a side note, Unplugged?
I mean, I think I have like a nostalgia for it. I haven't watched or listened to it like in the last like 4 years, but I remember liking it.
I would recommend checking it out. I enjoyed it. I did not enjoy Lauryn Hill's because
Okay.
I just don't know. It just I was super hyped for it, and then because for me she would translate perfectly into it, but I don't know. It just didn't. I don't know. I didn't feel like it was the full artistic mastery that Lauryn Hill brings. If that makes any sense.
Well, I think it's interesting to bring up Lauryn Hill now too, because I think that's an influence on Kanye that is kind of understated, and I think the miseducation of Lauryn Hill translates directly into Late Registration and into College Dropout. Even the whole classroom themes, like to the way the music is arranged. And Kanye talks about her being an influence, obviously, but then I think also on the original version of All Falls Down, she was on that.
Yes.
Yeah, and then they couldn't like clear the sample.
Like, I think that's the miseducation of Lauryn Hill is the only real direct through line I can see to his music prior. Like, I can see the influences, but in terms of where I can see the direct artistic method, because I don't think she has an artistic method that is at the same level as Kanye West's, but at the same time, that record, Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, is absolutely fantastic. It is it still gets a regular play at least a few times a month, in my house, and I think that's a really excellent point, bringing that up. And I would have liked to have seen more collaboration with them. Like, to me, it makes sense. I just wonder how those egos together are going to be. But then again, when it comes to music, they've both kind of shown that they can put it aside. Although there is, Lauryn Hill's,
Like, I don't know if Lauryn Hill would show up. Like, she
yeah,
doesn't really show like she like wants to, but like when she puts her mind to it, her music is like amazing, and like there's nothing like quite like it. But also like her body of work compared to like what she gets compared to isn't quite there. But yeah, I'd say like you said, like it's the most direct comparison, I think, and most like direct influence on Kanye.
All right, guys, thanks for listening. Just a reminder, if you like this podcast and want to keep hearing it, subscribe and give us a 5-star review. And if you're not already subscribing to our YouTube channel or following us on social media, get on it. You will not regret it.